What's up guys, Tim Little. Welcome back to Tacticalbassin. Today we are talking tube fishing and why you should add it to your arsenal during this fall fishing season. We're talking tube fishing, finesse tubes, micro tubes, all of it. We're covering some tips and some tricks. Let's get started. So what makes a tube or a tube jig so special? And honestly, my best answer is it looks a little bit like a lot of things. It looks like things that bass eat. Smallmouth, spotted bass, largemouth, they eat bait fish, crawdads, gobies, sculpins. A tube jig or a tube looks like a lot of things that bass eat. Today we're gonna cover some different styles of tubes, different jig heads, different line ties, those things, those types of things that hopefully will add to your finesse fishing arsenal. You can fish it so many ways. A tube is super versatile. You know, last week we talked about a drop shot and all the different ways you can fish it. Today we're gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna show you some casts, some different rod types, some different things on how to work a tube to get those fish to commit on days when they don't want to. And that's what's so special about a tube. You can fish this very reactive and get those finicky fish to react to that bait fish or that crawdad that's jumping and swimming in front of them. So first off, let's talk about the different types of tubes on the market. You know, there's so many different styles of tubes. I like to keep it simple because you can get overwhelmed. It gets overwhelming very quickly. Later on, I'll sit down and I'll go through all of my favorites. And of course, I'll link everything down below in the video description for you. But I'll go through my favorites, keep it simple, keep it easy. But this is a 3.5-inch tube. This actually has a very large head in it. This is a 1/2 ounce tube head. And what I like about the heavier heads, when I fire this thing out there, first off, I can cast it a long ways. That's very important when you're finesse fishing. You don't want to be sitting right over the top of them if you don't have to be. So I let this thing fall. Now there's so many different ways to fish a tube. You can fish it super slow and drag it, or you can crack it or swim it, whatever you want to call it, but it's getting that reactive bite. Again, the tube is so versatile. Now this specific tube, like I said, it's a 3.5-inch tube by Big Bite Baits. What I like about this tube is how soft it is and how durable it is. So right now I'm fishing it very aggressively. It's called cracking a tube or I guess hopping a tube. But what I'm doing, I'm snapping my rod tip on slack line. And what this thing does, it pops up and then kind of swims down and pops up and swims down. It mimics a dying bait fish or a bait fish that's just swimming around and wanting to get eaten. I'll let it sit on the bottom a little bit, kind of check my rod and get back to hopping. We'll get into gear and stuff a little bit later, but again, the tube is super versatile. One of my favorite ways to fish them on highly pressured waters or clear waters, you know, water with a lot of clarity, go out to your main lake points, especially on your tournament days, your weekend days, when you get a lot of traffic or boat traffic or wind. A lot of times you'll get those mud lines mixing in with that clear water, and those fish are going to pull right up in that mud line and use that mud line to camouflage themselves and ambush their prey. So again, you can drag it super slow. I like to do a little 2-hop cadence. Check it, hop, hop. And what that tube is doing, it's jumping up and then shooting off. We've done videos in the past about stroking a jig, and in my mind, if you see a crawdad underwater, when it takes off, it's like a 2-part motion. It puffs up and then shoots off. So when I'm doing this, checking my line, pop, pop. And you don't want to be super crazy and over dramatic with it, right? Again, every inch that you move your rod tip up here, your bait's moving 4 to 5 inches down there. So it's just a pop, pop. And that thing is covering 2 to 3 feet and then falling right back down. The best thing about the tube right now is that a lot of people have forgot about it. You know, the Ned Rig is kind of taken over as like that #1 slow bottom contact bait, right? The Ned Rig, it just produces all the time. But the tube, you can get more reactive with it, and it hasn't been overfished. A lot of people have forgot about it. Everybody's throwing the Ned Rig. You come in behind them with a tube, you get a different action, you get a different look, but you're fishing for the same fish. Those of you guys that don't want to throw you know, a finesse bait on a spinning rod, you can also throw these guys on a bait caster. You know, any of your light finesse jig rods or your medium action rods. I like a 7.3 to a 7.6 rod. I like a little longer rod for most of my finesse techniques, especially if I'm cracking it or I'm hopping it. Just gives me more room to work with, get longer casts, and obviously the longer rod plays the fish better. But don't be afraid to try out the heavier tube heads on a bait caster, because you can throw them all the way up to, you know, 3/4 of an ounce, especially if you're fishing current. Those types of situations, try and go with the bait caster. The next tube that I want to talk about is probably the most common tube. This is a 3.5 inch tube. See how it's real slender profile? Doesn't have that big bulbous head on it. This is more of my finesse fishing style tube. This is when I'm fishing clear water reservoirs, I'm fishing slow, and really targeting those finicky fish. If I'm fishing reactive or reaction fish, I'm typically throwing that bigger head. And I'm gonna show you close-ups. We'll sit down, I'll go through all that stuff a little bit later. But growing up, this was my favorite style of tube. A 3.5 inch tube. This is actually a dry creek tube. And how I fish this, cast it out, and I'm just kind of dragging bottom. Just keep contact, little twitch, twitch, drag, twitch, twitch. And all you're doing, you're trying to get those finicky fish that are just lazy just to commit. You know, if they're not wanting the reactive bite, you know, the reactive bite, they don't want that big tube dancing all over in front of them, this works as well. You can fish this on your favorite drop shot rod, your favorite Nico rig rod. It doesn't have to be anything specific, but again, if you're getting into this or you want to get a rod specifically for throwing a tube, I like a 7.4 to a 7.6 on most of my finesse fishing rods, just because, you know, the reasons I stated earlier. You can cast farther, you're fishing light line, you can play the fish better. Just works better for me. But that's the little, I'm not gonna call it a finesse, actually I'll call it a finesse tube. Now I'll show you the little tiny guys that are really cool too. The last tube that I want to talk about are these little micro tubes. This one's actually a TRD tubes from Z-Man. I have that rigged actually with the owner. That's the blockhead, a Ned Rig head. Instead of going through the tube like you would normally rig, this is just like a Ned Rig. It's got this tube specifically has a solid head in it, or a dense head, so you can't run your tube head all the way up, so you gotta rig it from the outside. But you can see how small and how finessey this guy is. So a tube is made to look like a lot of different things. I'm gonna adjust the camera, we'll sit down, I'm gonna lay out the different heads, the different types of baits, and all that good stuff, so you guys can dive down deep into this stuff and really pick apart what you want. figure out what will work in your fisheries. All right, now I got all this stuff set up for you guys. Now, if I didn't cover it in the first section, another benefit to the tube is the way it falls. You know, you can get real reactive with a lot of finesse baits, a Ned Rig for instance, but it's gonna fall typically straight down. When you start playing around with different types of tubes, tube heads and shapes, when you hop this thing or you pop it up, you can get this thing to fall and spiral like a dying bait fish. You can get it to look like gliding back down like a sculpin or a goby. So you can do some little tips, do some little tricks to get what you want out of a tube. So first, let's cover the tube heads themselves, because there's about 3 or 4 different ones that I like to use. You can see here, real fat head. This is your normal darter head style with a 90-degree line tie. This has a 60-degree line tie. All that stuff comes into play. If I am fishing a reactive tube, or if I want to really crack that tube or hop that tube, I'm gonna go with typically 2 styles of heads, and both of them are made by a company called Bite Me. These are the 2 different tube heads that I like to throw when I'm getting real reactive with the bait. 60-degree line tie. You can see a lot heavier head. This is a 3/8 ounce. This is a 1/4 ounce, but you can see the difference in the head shape. Now, if I'm finesse fishing, or I'm fishing slower, more finicky fish, I'm gonna go with one of these 2 head shapes. This is a Yamamoto, this is an owner. Both have 90-degree line ties. What's important about the line tie, the angle that the line comes off the bait, as you can see, this has a 60-degree line tie. When I pop this bait, I'm pulling towards me a little bit. That line is coming towards me. With a 90-degree, your line is more directly above the bait, so it's gonna pop the bait straight up more than coming towards you. Not sure what that is. We don't have any trains here. But where the 90-degree line tie comes into play for me, growing up fishing deep clear water reservoirs out here on the West Coast, fishing deeper, you know, your 45 to 60 foot range, you're not necessarily making a bomber cast and fishing, you know, 100 feet out that way. As you're working that bait towards you, you're fishing more below the boat. And when you get hung up, or you're fishing through, let's say pea gravel or chunk rock, something like that, and you pop it, you want that bait to come up and out of it. Now, if you do a 60-degree line tie, when you pop that bait, it's gonna kind of come forward a little bit more than the 90-degree, and I just seem to get hung up more with that style of line tie in deeper water. So the other thing I want you guys to take note of is the actual weight placement on these heads. Same with this head. The weight's more evenly dispersed. That's gonna change your fall. How that tube, when you pop that tube up, and I know I'm primarily talking about fishing this as a reactive bait, because that's mostly what I do. But when you pop that tube up and it falls, this guy right here, it's gonna be top heavy, head heavy. It's gonna fall more vertically, straight down. Whereas this head right here has more of the weight throughout the shank of the hook, throughout the belly of the tube. This bait is gonna plane out and get more of your glide fall, more of your goby kind of fall to the bottom, like that belly just sucks down. Instead of just crashing to the bottom, popping up and crashing down, this is gonna pop up and glide down, pop up, glide down. So those 4 heads are typically the heads that I use. And depending on the structure that I'm fishing, the fish that I'm fishing for, and the gear that I'm using, it all depends. So those are the heads. Now, actually rigging a tube, I want to give you guys a quick tip. This saved me a lot of time and spit and putting lead in my mouth when I was rigging lots of tubes for tournaments. Take your favorite, this is actually pro gear, take your favorite a scent, and I typically do not use scent just because it's a mess, it's a pain in the butt. But for this tactic only, I use scent. Now, what I do, because those of you guys that have rigged tubes before know that trying to put a big lead head into the bait is kind of a pain. Typically, you gotta, you spit on this to get it wet and then you slide it in. That's where I like the scent. 2 reasons. It makes it easy to rig before tournaments. I will take a Ziploc bag and I'll rig 20 or 30 of these and to have them pre-rigged. That way I don't have to do it when time and money's on the line. But it also makes it easier to rig. So take your favorite scent. You know, typically I would throw like a craw or some kind of scent like that. Put it on the head of the bait, head of the hook. Hold the tube upside down, get the little tentacles out of the way, and then you're just gonna thread this on. Kind of work it on. It's gonna slide all the way up to the top. Now the trick, do not, unless this is the one that you're tying onto your rod, do not pop, get all the way up, do not pop the eye of the hook through the bait, because all that scent and goo that you just put on it will shoot through that and start leaking on all your stuff. Wait till it's tournament time, wait till you have to tie it on, then pop it up, you know, pop the eye of the hook out right there, and now you'll tie it on. The other benefit is you added scent and the fish tend to hang on to your bait longer. But look at this little pretty package right here. Another tip, or maybe it's just me being over, you know, ADD or whatever, take your tentacles and split your tentacles. A lot of tubes will come with tentacles that stay connected, and I want as much action as this bait's falling. I want those tentacles flopping and flying all over the place. So make sure that you take all your tentacles and spread them apart. That right there is a 3/4 ounce tube rigged on that bite me head, and you could crack the heck out of this thing, crashing, falling, hopping, fishing it all over the place, and get those primarily those big smallmouth to eat these. So that's a little tip, rigging the tubes. It works with all the different styles of tubes. You know, let's touch on those real quick. And my absolute favorite style of tube, like I said earlier, is going to be just the 3.5 inch tournament tube. This specifically is Dry Creek. You guys that have watched our videos before know that both Matt and I primarily throw these style of tubes, and in just a couple of different colors. Old Ugly, and this is just a green pumpkin, purple copper flake. And as far as colors, I keep it really simple. I go natural or iridescent on your sunny, high sun days when there's a lot of visibility, a lot of clarity in the water. I go with a tube that is almost iridescent. This is called Old Ugly, and I've caught so many fish on that color right there. And if there is cloud cover, or if it is overcast and a little stormy, low light conditions, I will go with a color that's more contrasty. So like a green pumpkin with some dark flake in it, or some brown, something like that. But again, I will link all that stuff down below in the video description for you. This is a perfect example. This is green pumpkin, purple copper. You can just see the difference in color in the tubes. So keep it really simple. Go with your green pumpkins, your copper flake, your purple flake, you know, your different reds, unless you're going with a craw pattern. Then you can throw in a craw pattern, but I keep it really simple. The last tube style that I wanted to talk about is that little micro tube. Like I said, that's the TRD tube. You can apply this to your TRD fishing. When you're throwing the turd or the Ned, whatever you want to call it, the TRD, the Ned Rig, don't be afraid to branch out and throw the little micro tube. You're fishing for the same fish, just a little different action, little different fall, different presentation. And if you're fishing a fishery that gets pounded with Ned rigs, you know, you might want to switch it up with that. So there it is, guys. That is kind of just a tube fishing 101. I know there's so many different types of tube heads on the market, so many different styles of tubes, but hopefully today's video shed a little bit of light on the versatility of a tube and how you can fish it in so many different ways. Fish it very aggressively, very reactive, or drag it, hop it, shake it, fish it real finessey, and get those finicky fish to bite. But if you guys haven't ever thrown a tube, or you've lost confidence in a tube, or haven't spent enough time on a tube, I challenge you guys to add it to your arsenal, because tube fishing is a great way to load the boat. You can fish it reactive if you're a power fisherman. You can fish it slow and methodical if you're a finesse fishing, and everything in between. But you guys, a 3.5-inch tube rigged on how you like it, fished the way you like it, will put fish in the boat. If you guys have any questions, please leave those down below in the comment section. I will try to get to those. And as always, guys, we appreciate the support. If you guys like this video, please hit that thumbs up button. If you guys haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. We do 3 videos a week for you. We appreciate you guys. Have a good one.